Friday, May 4th. This is Uptown Radio. I'm Mira Gable.
And I'm Augusta Anthony. Northern New Jersey's 11th congressional district is up for grabs in this year's midterms. Republicans will have to defend the seat against a potential liberal wave. But what will it take to win voters?
Partisanship isn't going to be the driver. They're only going to go out and vote because of the issues.
Aging infrastructure is causing headaches for commuters between New York and New Jersey. Meanwhile, politicians are fighting over the funding to fix it.
The Portal Bridge has been on the books for 30 years. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that 106-year-old bridge needs to be replaced.
And Mets fans are ready for the team's summer season.
We lose. We lose a lot. It takes a certain type of person to just accept it.
All of this and more on Uptown Radio. But first, let's go to the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Nora Rahm. President Trump spoke to the National Rifle Association this afternoon at its annual convention in Dallas. He told tens of thousands of members his administration is fighting to protect their constitutional right to bear arms.
Your Second Amendment rights are under siege, but they will never, ever be under siege as long as I'm your president.
The president also claimed that Democrats want to outlaw guns. He urged attendees to vote Republican in the November elections. Before leaving for Dallas, President Trump said a date and location have been set for his summit with North Korean ruler Kim Jong-un. He said the details will be announced soon. He also told reporters a lot of things have happened with respect to the 3 Americans being held in North Korea. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds says she's preparing to sign the most restrictive abortion law in the country. As NPR's Sarah McCammon reports, the governor's office said she'll sign into law what's known as the Fetal Heartbeat Bill.
The bill passed by the Iowa State Legislature earlier this week is expected to set up a legal battle over limitations on abortion rights. Some abortion rights opponents have said they hope the legislation will open the door for the U.S. Supreme Court to revisit the Roe v. Wade decision, which legalized abortion nationwide in 1973. Except for medical emergencies, the measure bans doctors from performing abortions in Iowa after a fetal heartbeat can be detected. That's often around 6 weeks gestation, when many women do not even yet know they're pregnant. Sarah McCammon, NPR News, Washington.
Lawmakers in Kansas approved a bill today that would allow adoption agencies that turn away same-sex couples as parents on religious grounds to contract with the government and receive public dollars. The legislature in Oklahoma approved a similar measure yesterday. Critics say the bill sanctions discrimination at taxpayer expense. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has apologized for his recent remarks on the Holocaust, which drew widespread condemnation. NPR's Daniel Estrin reports from Jerusalem.
At a Palestinian leadership summit Monday, Abbas said Jews in Europe faced persecution leading up to the Holocaust because of their function in society and unfair money lending. The UN's Mideast envoy said Abbas had repeated anti-Semitic slurs. The U.S., Israel, and the European Union also condemned the remarks. Abbas has issued a rare apology. In a statement, he said, "If people were offended, especially people of the Jewish faith, I apologize to them." He said the Holocaust was, quote, the most heinous crime in history, and he condemned anti-Semitism. But Israel's defense minister said the apology was unacceptable. He argued Abbas had a history of denying Holocaust history. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Jerusalem.
On Wall Street, just before the close, the Dow was up 332 points. The S&P was up 33. This is NPR.
In New York, I'm Dan Rabb. Governor Andrew Cuomo unveiled legislation this afternoon that aims to ban fossil fuel drilling in New York waters. The bill prohibits leases for underwater drilling and would also ban the transport of crude oil from offshore wells in the North Atlantic. Cuomo says the bill is in response to the Trump administration's plan to expand offshore drilling nationally.
New York takes pride in building on the legacy of environmental protection.
The bill is set to be submitted to the state assembly this afternoon. More arrests are expected in the investigation into NXIVM, the cult-like group in Brooklyn that included former Smallville actress Allison Mack. Mack and NXIVM's leader Keith Raniere were charged with sex trafficking after accusations they forced women who joined the organization into sexual slavery. Federal prosecutors told a judge this morning that they plan to name additional defendants in the case. Both Mack and Raniere have pleaded not guilty to all charges. The state's police union is reacting angrily today to a judge's decision to dismiss its suit seeking to prevent the release of body camera footage. The Patrolmen's Benevolent Association sued the police commissioner and the mayor in January. They say the agency's release of the videos violated privacy rules for police personnel records. The PBA blasted the judge's decision, calling the NYPD policy illegal and arbitrary. It's currently a humid 82 degrees and overcast in Central Park. Clouds continue tomorrow with rain and cooler temperatures expected on Sunday. Dan Rabb, Columbia Radio News.
Mayor Bill de Blasio is promoting a plan to provide safe injection sites for IV drug users. Advocates say these sites help promote clean needle use and prevent overdoses, but implementing them presents legal and other challenges.
I spoke with Amos Irwin at the Law Enforcement Action Partnership about the complications of opening these sites.
Well, you're not allowed to operate an establishment in which you know that illegal drug use is taking place. And that would, of course, be happening in one of these facilities. However, local officials have broad powers to, enact sort of public health emergency measures so that, that would likely stand the test of the federal prosecution. It's just a question of, is somebody going to make this into a giant federal legal battle?
How can it be legal to give people a place to carry out illegal activity?
The law is that you cannot establish a facility essentially for the purpose of, making a profit off of people using drugs, similar to like a crack house, a shooting gallery. And, intent is important in law. And the intent is the, 180-degree opposite. The opposite is to help these people as opposed to make money off of them.
And so picking up on what you said about a federal legal battle, what are the next steps and potential roadblocks that de Blasio is going to face in terms of getting these sites open?
First of all, is the city setting it up, or is it going to have outside groups set it up and the city will just give the okay? Are there going to be medical professionals on site? Are you going to co-locate a treatment facility or other services to make sure that there are services right in the same place as this facility? As well as where in the city should this facility, or facilities be established? So there are a lot of decisions that need to be made. And I think that's probably the major roadblock.
Amos Irwin from the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Augusta. It's a pleasure.
More bike lanes are coming to New York City. That's according to the Transportation Department, which announced plans earlier today to add bike lanes to 13 bridges connecting Manhattan to the Bronx.
Meanwhile, in Red Hook, the New York Bike Expo is back. Reporter Bo Hamby was there and met cyclists who said that while more bike lanes are great, those aren't the only problem they're facing.
Outside the Bike Expo at Pier 12 in Red Hook, Daniel Sesnian is getting free repairs on his bright red bike. He lives in Fresh Meadow, Queens, and he rode down to the expo. And he's on his bike quite a bit.
Pretty much every day, actually. I commute and I live on the bike.
Sesnian is one of more than 86,000 people who commute by bicycle in New York City, according to the Department of Transportation. That's more bike commuters than any other city in the U.S. Sesnian is an experienced cyclist, and he says he feels pretty safe on the streets, but there can still be some close encounters.
It's a bit of a adventure. Manhattan is really crazy. Just cars, pedestrians, they're just, all of them seem to have view to kill you. But it's part of the fun.
And Sesnian says he's happy with the bike lanes that are being placed throughout the city. As biking has boomed, so have bike routes. There are now more than 1,000 miles of bike lanes around the city, a number that has doubled since 2006. And that network continues to grow. The Transportation Department announced today that all 13 Harlem River crossings connecting North Manhattan and the Bronx will be outfitted with bike lanes. For cyclists, more bike lanes are always welcome.
The designated bike lanes really help, and I think it's pretty safe.
That's Sam Place, a cyclist from Manhattan. She says the city has done a pretty good job adding more bike lanes. It's the cars stopped in those lanes that she's worried about.
Yeah, you just have to watch out for cars, opening their doors. So I've been hit a few times by that, but nothing else.
Other cyclists at the expo agreed. They say more bike lanes are great, but potholes and illegally parked cars make them hard to use. Ken McLeod is the policy director for the League of American Bicyclists. He says 2 things need to be done to make streets safer for them.
One is slowing down streets so that when crashes do occur, they aren't as harmful. The other thing is protected and connected infrastructure.
Like the bike lanes planned for the Harlem River crossings. Talia Lempert agrees. She's selling bicycle paintings at the expo, and she's been riding bikes in the city for 20 years.
New York is a great city for cycling.
And she's happy that the city is adding more bike lanes in places like North Manhattan.
I think it's great. I mean, there's a lot of them, and I hope they put in more.
And like Place, Lempert says motorists are the real problem. They disregard bike lanes, which means she's constantly on the lookout for car doors. But that's not going to stop her from getting on her bike.
Life is dangerous.
But life for New York cyclists should be a little less dangerous in 2021, when the first bike lanes over the Harlem River are completed. Bo Hamby, Columbia Radio News.
While bicycles are increasingly popular in the city, the bulk of residents still take the train. Every day, 250,000 commuters ride between New York and New Jersey. The Portal North Bridge and the tunnel under the Hudson connect the states. Both are old and failing.
The Gateway Project is a $30 billion effort to replace them, but so far only a fraction of that money has been secured. The rest is tangled up in politics. Madeline Thompson took a look at what's being done with the funding on hand and the consequences of further delays.
David Williams has a morning routine. He makes coffee, cream and sugar, he walks his dogs, and then he boards a train from Rahway, New Jersey to New York Penn Station. He's on his phone, like most commuters, but not for fun. He's trying to find out if he'll get to work on time.
When riding into the city on transit, it's hit or miss. When something goes wrong, it goes wrong in a big way.
That's what happened after Hurricane Sandy. 6 years ago, the train tunnel under the Hudson River flooded and its electrical system was badly damaged. And the superstorm didn't help the antiquated Portal Bridge. The bridge and tunnel are 107 years old. They were under construction at the same time the Titanic was being built. Now, between hurricane damage and old age, they're on their last legs. And both are what's called single points of failure. If either one of them stops working, the whole system shuts down. And if the system shuts down, Williams doesn't know how he'd get to work. You could go to Staten Island.
Staten Island is a traffic city right now. I mean, the only way would be grabbing a bus and going up to the Lincoln Tunnel or the Holland Tunnel.
Those tunnels are a 45-minute drive from his house, and hundreds of thousands of other cars would be clogging the roads too. What about the ferries?
Yeah, all the ferries leave from Jersey City, so you still have to go through all these choke points to get through these rivers and get up close to the city.
That's where the Gateway Project comes in. It's a massive effort to replace the bridge and build a new tunnel by 2025, but it needs a whopping $30 billion to do so. The most recent federal budget promised some funding, but only 2%, and in a backhanded way. To get that money, the Gateway Project still has to apply to the Department of Transportation. And funding delays due to, say, political infighting won't just delay commuters, they'll add millions to the total cost. John Porcari is the director of the Gateway Development Corporation, which is overseeing the project.
So I hope you're sitting down because the natural cost escalation on the tunnel is about $1.2 million per day.
What he means is the prices of concrete, fuel, and labor go up. The budget for the project takes those increases into account, but it also assumes all the funding will come in on time. The more time passes, the more those materials will cost. New York and New Jersey have committed a big chunk of money, $5 billion, but that's not in the bank yet either. Still, Porcari is optimistic about the federal government's promise.
Think of it as a down payment.
Some things can be done with that down payment, like buying land in New York and New Jersey to build giant fans to ventilate the new tunnel, like digging really deep under the subway and the city's utility pipes to connect the new tunnel to Hudson Yards. And early construction to replace the Portal Bridge has already started. Scott Clinton is overseeing this stage. His team is funded by a $16 million grant.
While you're on the project, your glasses should be on your face, your helmet should be on your head.
On a freezing, windy day, punctuated by trains and planes flying overhead, Clinton pulls out the blueprints for Phase 1.
We're installing 2 transmission monopoles to carry...
He's talking about a couple of power lines.
And then we're building a retention wall here.
And a new track that will allow lots more trains to use the new bridge. The new bridge will be tall enough for boats to pass under it. It won't have to swing open and risk getting stuck like it did back in March.
You know, it happened at the worst possible time. Amtrak's Portal Bridge getting stuck in the open position.
The transit service is back to normal after crews repaired a Portal Bridge that became stuck in the open position.
At the height of the morning rush, too.
450 trains use that bridge every day. When the bridge is stuck, so are they. Those delays will keep happening as long as the money keeps trickling in. It's not unusual for huge projects like this to get their money in stages, but Larry Penner thinks there's no good reason for it to be coming in this slowly. Penner's a transportation historian. He used to manage funding for projects just like Gateway for the Federal Transit Administration.
The Portal Bridge has been on the books for 30 years. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that 106-year-old bridge needs to be replaced.
Penner is quick to point fingers at the politicians involved. All of them, from President Donald Trump to Senator Chuck Schumer.
They kind of remind me of the old cartoon character Wimpy from the Popeye cartoons who said, "I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. Without money, you can't make things happen."
It's a race against the clock to get new structures in place before the old ones break down. John Porcari, director of the Gateway Corporation, says if it doesn't get the money it needs, commuters will be out of luck.
There is no backup plan. There's no ferry service. There's no additional bus service to the Port Authority bus terminal that would actually take the place of this.
Does that make you nervous?
Yes, absolutely. This is why I call it the most urgent infrastructure project in America.
Major construction on the new bridge will start next year. Until then, any nervous commuters can go to the Gateway Corporation's next public meeting a week from today. Madeline Thompson, Columbia Radio News.
Our next story takes us to Manhattan's Chinatown. Residents of a building on Bowery were evicted 4 months ago. Housing activists are demanding a deadline for their return. It's the latest battle in an ongoing war between the tenants and their landlord over their right to remain in the building. My beautiful co-host, Augusta Anthony, has the story.
85 Bowery is a 5-story tenement on the edge of Chinatown. The fire escapes are rusted, the earthy red paint is chipped. The glass door is plastered with papers, construction warnings, permits, and 2 official city notices in red ink saying vacate, do not enter. 71-year-old Jun Zin, a tenant of the building, and Vincent Chow, the tenant's representative, are peering through the glass at the hallway inside.
Yeah, the caution tape, yellow caution tape, and red tape. The red tape saying asbestos hazard, and yellow caution tape.
In January this year, all 73 residents were evicted after the Department of Buildings said the staircase was unsafe. They were told they'd be back in their homes by the end of March, but since then, the landlord claims the building must be treated for asbestos. The landlord, Joseph Batesh, bought the building and its neighbour 83 Bowery as part of a $62 million deal in 2013. As Chow explains, things were quiet until 2 years later, Batesh tried to evict one of the tenants.
Landlord filed the eviction case at 83 first for just one apartment. First family got the eviction notice was my cousin.
Chow says it's a typical harassment case. He says rich developers swoop in, buy up buildings, and try to force tenants out by neglect or by burying them in legal fees. After Chow's cousin was evicted, he began to organize the tenants to fight the landlord.
I kind of know the issue, right? It's about the whole building. So we come together, create tenants association.
Chow works at a dim sum restaurant a few blocks away on Mott Street. He's tall with slicked back hair and an anorak. He came to Chinatown almost 20 years ago from Fujian in southern China. Now, he says many landlords are ignoring rent control laws.
And landlords say, oh, this is not rent stabilized, forcing us to hire like private lawyer. So we have a very good engineer report showing these two buildings are rent stabilized.
After suing Chow's cousin, the landlord filed again against all the tenants in the building, this time in New York's Supreme Court. A judge referred the decision on rent stabilization to the Division of Housing and Community Renewals, and they sided with the tenants. The landlord declined a request for interview, but a spokesperson that was asked about the landlord's understanding of the rent stabilization status said they couldn't comment because of pending litigation. In January, city agencies inspected the building and found it unsafe. The tenants were forced out overnight. Junzin is one of the tenants. She's also from Fujian and has lived in the building since arriving in New York over 10 years ago.
They came into the apartment and told everybody to leave. I don't want to leave, but I'm afraid they will push us out. So I told my husband to go out first. Go! That's the only thing I can understand. We had to leave everything in the apartment. They took us very far away. My husband is sick and needs to see the doctor, but we don't know how to take the subway, so we just stay there. We can't go anywhere.
The tenants were put on a bus and taken to a shelter in Brooklyn. Jin was so desperate to return to Chinatown that in February, she and her fellow tenants went on hunger strike to demand action. They gathered tents and blankets and camped outside the Department of Housing Development and Preservation.
I went on hunger strike because they gave me no choice. I want to go home.
This is New York's #1 news. Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
The hunger strike attracted attention and even made local television news.
Protesters camping out in the freezing temperatures for a hunger strike. About a dozen people who call 85 Bowery home are demanding quicker building repairs.
And the landlord agreed to move them to a hotel a few doors down from their former home. And he's footing the bill.
There's not many tenants like them able to force the landlord to pay the hotel.
3 weeks ago, a tenant spotted construction workers carrying out large trash bags and tossing them in a dumpster. The landlord said they were removing perishable items, but the tenants rummaged through the dumpster to find personal items, including clothing and children's books. Local elected officials condemned the landlord, and a spokesperson has since apologized and said the tenants will be reimbursed. But for now, the building remains shut. Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez has asked the district attorney to investigate the case, and the tenants maintain that a vacate order without a specified date for return is illegal.
Shame on you, DLB!
Last week, the tenants took to the streets again, protesting outside the Department of Buildings next to City Hall in Lower Manhattan. They're carrying signs, some featuring the face of their landlord.
Who's there? Angry tenants everywhere!
Chow says the fight over 85 Bowery is creating a coalition across New York. He says low-wage immigrant communities must stand together against real estate interests.
You can see a lot of Chinese, Black, Latino, white, we all come together. This is very special.
He makes his way to the front of the crowd and delivers a letter to the Department of Buildings that accuses city agencies of siding unfairly with the landlord.
Okay, I'm going to deliver the letter now. With our demands, start collude with the landlord. The DOB must give us the deadline when the 85 Bowery tenant can go home.
The Department of Buildings said in a statement that they are pushing forward to complete repairs and holding the landlord responsible to provide a safe home for tenants. But as Chow comes out from delivering the letter, he says they won't stop until the tenants are back in their homes.
And we think we're going to win, and we give the 2 weeks, they will respond. Otherwise, we can continue. We'll go to City Hall, make it bigger.
A spokesperson for the landlord could not give a deadline, but said they remain committed to returning families as soon as possible. Augusta Anthony, Columbia Radio News. And now, a piece from our commentary series, where our reporters reflect on their personal stories.
When Juliet Jabkiro was 17, all she wanted was to be a doctor. Or rather, her father told her that's what she wanted. But in the end, it wasn't a path she could follow.
Growing up in France as the daughter of a Moroccan immigrant, there were certain things expected of me. My family had made sacrifices to give me a comfortable Western life. My grandparents were farmers. My dad is a science teacher. And for him, the next step in the social ladder was to be a doctor. He wished he was a doctor, but he never had the chance. So when I was 11 and told him I wanted to be a journalist, he spent years convincing me that what I really wanted was not to be a poor or jobless reporter, but a doctor, someone who could help people every day and support their family. My dad is very, very convincing. I've always admired his resilience. In France, you more or less have to choose what you want to do right after high school. So, 2 months after my graduation, I went to medical school. I was one of more than 3,000 students in that first year. Only 450 would make it to the second year. After that, they'd be in for a decade of sleepless nights, studying for exams and working shifts at the hospital. And if I made it through, I'd get to be a doctor, my dad's holy grail. Of course, I didn't make it. I would not be telling you this story if I did, because, I would be busy saving lives. I was confused when I found myself uninterested in my classes that first year of med school. I tried to focus on learning the names of all the human body's vessels and nerves, drawn in blue and yellow in my notebooks. But I started feeling deeply sad. So sad, I didn't want to get out of bed anymore. One day, I realized I'd been living off chocolate bars for an entire week. And I hadn't opened the curtains for several days. I laid in bed, crying, stuffing my face with sugar, staring at the pale blue light of the laptop playing Smallville. I wanted so badly to want to be a doctor, but it didn't feel right. I had to do something about it. I had to tell my dad. So over the weekend, I went to my parents' home. On the train, I was nervously biting my nails. When I got home, my dad was watching the evening news in the living room. I stood there, waiting for him to acknowledge me. I was so scared, my stomach hurt. When I managed to whisper, "Dad, I'm going to quit medicine," my voice was so strangled with tears, he couldn't understand. I had to say it another time. And then I burst into tears as my dad's face distorted. It felt like I was letting him down. It still does sometimes. Years after, he still says, if you had wanted to, you could have been a doctor. It used to upset me. But now, I'm about to graduate from journalism school. I'm going to be a reporter. That 11-year-old kid I used to be, she gets to live her dreams. It wasn't easy. It took time and fights and tears. But now, instead of feeling sorry for myself, I feel sorry for my dad. After all, he's the one who didn't get to live his dream.
Juliette Jabquero is moving soon to Senegal to start a job. And her father is almost happy about it.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Mira Gable.
And I'm Augusta Anthony. There's more to come after this break. Stay with us. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Augusta Anthony.
And I'm Mira Gable. Coming up, citizens decide how to spend city funds, new bathrooms, or new school computers.
And celebrities and people watchers are getting ready for the Met Gala on Monday. The theme? Catholicism.
These stories and more, but first, the news.
In New York, I'm Wendy Rhodes. President Trump responded today to what he called a media witch hunt surrounding comments made yesterday by newly appointed counsel Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani told Fox News that the president reimbursed his then attorney for hush money paid to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Trump said today that Giuliani is simply new to his legal team and has yet to get his facts straight. Mount Kilauea on the Big Island of Hawaii erupted last night after a series of earthquakes. 2,000 people were evacuated when rivers of lava flowed down streets and into residential neighborhoods. The governor has declared a state of emergency and called in the National Guard to help with evacuations. April marked a record 91 consecutive months of job growth. The unemployment rate dropped below 4% for the first time since 2000. Still, analysts say job growth was 15% below expectations amid sluggish wage growth. And the 2018 Nobel Prize for Literature goes to nobody. The Swedish panel that awards the prize has decided to postpone it this year amid internal sexual abuse scandals. They say 2 prizes will be awarded next year. In sports, tomorrow marks the 144th running of the Kentucky Derby. 20 horses will compete for a $1 million purse. 100,000 spectators are expected to attend the horse race/fashion event that is as well known for elaborate hats and elbow gloves as for saddles and silks. This year's favorite includes New York's own Audible. Contrary to rumors, the horse is not the namesake of Amazon's audiobook division. Even so, CEO Jeff Bezos has promised a free audiobook to his Twitter followers if Audible wins. The only horse from New York to ever win the Kentucky Derby was Funnyside in 2003. It's 79 degrees and cloudy in New York City. Flights in and out of LaGuardia are experiencing 20 to 25-minute delays due to scattered thunderstorms. Wendy Rhodes, Columbia Radio News.
University students across the country have been calling for their school to stop investing in Israeli goods and services. The movement is called Boycott, Divest, Sanction, or BDS. It's in protest to Israel's treatment of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank.
BDS has taken hold at New York University. Over 50 student organizations have signed a letter supporting a boycott and have also agreed not to partner with pro-Israeli organizations. Eileen Grench reports.
The school's library is quiet. Raneen Khalil sits on the polished marble floor. She's a freshman at NYU. Her major is finance. Her Instagram is lit. That's millennial for cool. Today, she's in a crisp white blazer and a pink hijab. But she's not here to take selfies or to study.
I am here today because I'm against the occupation in Palestine. I just know the truth and reality, and I've done enough research to know that what's happening is not okay.
2 hand-painted canvas banners featuring the Palestinian flag and slogans like "Long live the Intifada" are draped across the center of the cavernous space, creating a narrow walkway for students to pass. Khalil is sitting shoulder to shoulder with around 20 other students. They're staging a sit-in. They want to educate the rest of the campus about the Palestinian cause and the boycott of Israel.
There is a lack of dialogue where people just are arguing for the sake of arguing, trying to convince the other side, and no one's actually trying to listen.
Hardline supporters of Israel are also there, and Khalil and her friends are upset. Earlier, pro-Israeli students purposefully walked across the flag. Others also yelled at the protesters. Brian Bush is among those hardliners, yet, unlike his more vocal counterparts, the business major stands quietly, watching the protest through his black, thick-rimmed glasses. He's a member of another student club, Realize Israel, a conservative student organization that's Zionist. He believes Jews have a right to their own country in what is now Israel.
We're being boycotted by 53 groups now from the school.
And he says he just doesn't get why the protesters are still there.
I feel that the NYU president has already officially not endorsed BDS, and I feel that NYU is an open environment.
Many American students only study the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but now a struggle nearly 6,000 miles away has extended from the Middle East all the way to American college campuses like Ohio State and UC Berkeley. Arizona State was sued this year for not allowing speakers to express anti-Israeli sentiments, and Fordham University has banned Students for Justice in Palestine. Back at NYU, the university president says he will not support any BDS initiative. But Bush's club, Realize Israel, is still being boycotted, and he's frustrated. But he doesn't approach the sit-in. Raneen Khalil says there's no point in trying to convince a Zionist anyways.
There's no benefit in that. So I think it's not just because people who know, they know, and they've already decided on a stance on a side to choose, and they're set on it.
Khalil says she's on the Palestinian side, and other students are on the Israeli side. But the lines aren't always so clearly drawn. The BDS debate has also divided the Jewish community. The Bronfman Center is a tall brownstone on NYU's campus. It's meant to be a home for all Jewish student life at school. But when students tried to organize a group to support the boycott of Israel, they were told they couldn't do it there. For Jewish students who support Palestine, problems can get worse. A website called Canary Mission lists the names of student activists, blacklisting them. Its mission is to prevent them from getting jobs in the Jewish community.
They essentially look for people's public statements in regards to BDS or Palestine, and then twist their words and claim that they're anti-Semitic. But they claim their tagline is, "If you're racist, the world should know," which is just absolutely absurd.
That's a student at NYU. He's Jewish, an activist who supports Palestine, and he's attending a BDS event in Washington Square Park. Search for his name on the website, and you'll see photos of him and other students, Jewish and Muslim, like mugshots on a police wanted poster. I'm not using his name because he's already blacklisted on the site, but Uptown Radio has confirmed that past statements he made to the media are posted on Canary Mission, along with the username for his Twitter account.
Certainly I've been feeling less and less Jewish. I was raised fairly secular, but I've been really feeling like I'm losing my connection with the Jewish people. I think this concept of like Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, has been really corrupted by the country Israel.
Despite charged language on both sides, there are professors who still believe debate is possible. At his office in Cooper Square, Professor Andrew Ross explains that he's witnessed meaningful dialogue.
When it comes up in my classes, I just let students debate this. There's no need really for me to weigh in. Students are quite capable of debating for themselves.
But Ross is a BDS activist himself. Navigating life on a politically fraught campus can be hard for students and teachers. Back on campus, the student members of Realize Israel meet at the Bronfman Center for an entirely different kind of event. They've brought an Israeli comedian to their club meeting, and around 50 students sit and giggle on fold-out chairs. Ari Spritzler, a business major and vice president of Realize, says he's just relieved that he studies business, not political science.
It's hard enough to deal with this when I'm outside of class for literally all my free time. If I had to do this inside of class too, I would lose my mind.
Despite the continued tensions, he says things are surprisingly calmer than they were the week before. But he says it's not because the two sides are talking.
It was raining and gross outside all week, so I think both sides kind of tempered down the activities that we were planning on having.
It wasn't raining on Saturday when pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian groups clashed at a Realize Israel event in Washington Square Park. There, police officers arrested 2 pro-Palestinian students for stealing, ripping, and burning Israeli flags. Realize Israel said on its Facebook account that they denounce what they call the violent actions. Students for Justice in Palestine stated that they will not stop fighting until Palestine is free. But for now, members of both groups all still have homework to do. Eileen Grench, Columbia Radio News.
New York City's annual budget is more than $80 billion, and the process of deciding out how that money is spent is confusing. But each year, a little bit of that money, about $1 million per city council district, is set aside for ordinary citizens to spend directly.
This morning, Elisa Escarce went to an elementary school in Brooklyn to find out how one district's voters decided to spend their money.
A few dozen fifth graders walk quietly down the aisles of the auditorium at Elsa Ebeling School in East Flatbush. They settle into wooden chairs and start wiggling around. Teacher Janice Lewis says all the kids know is that they're here for an assembly.
They weren't really told what it was about, but that it was something special, and we had special guests coming in.
The special guest is City Council member Jumani Williams. He represents District 45, which includes East Flatbush. He's here to announce what voters in his district decided to spend $1 million on when they voted in April. They got to choose between a ramp at the local library, new bathrooms at a community center, and a few other things, including new computers for this school. Caitlin Dior is a 5th grader here, and she says she would like that.
There's like at least 15 computers that work, and there's 32 in total, but there's only 15 that work, so like we're really on and off of not using them.
The assembly starts and the room goes quiet.
Good morning, boys and girls.
There are 3 easels on the stage, each with a poster flipped backwards. The principal and a few school administrators talk to the kids about why voting is important. Then Councilmember Williams goes to the front, and it's time for the big reveal. One by one, Williams' staff revealed the posters, and the project with the most votes, new computers. A little over half of the city's 51 council members offer participatory budgeting. Williams was one of the first to sign on a few years ago.
The biggest thing that I do as a council member has to do with the budget. Unfortunately, that's the thing that folks understand the least or are engaged with the least. And so this is a way for people to understand how the budget process works.
This year, the council lowered the voting age from 14 to 11. So a bunch of the kids in the crowd got to vote.
I think the earlier you get people not just voting, but understanding why they're voting, to see the connection directly between their voting and something happening, you can get voters for life, get more people engaged.
Caitlin, the 5th grader, turned 11 this year, so she got to vote.
I feel happy, I feel excited, I feel good about having my opinion being heard.
For a grade schooler, being old enough to vote also means it's time for middle school. So Caitlin won't get to use the new computers. But
I feel really happy for the little kids who are going to be able to use the brand new computers because of my opinion, and I feel good about that.
Across the city, voters decided between projects as varied as security cameras for public housing to road resurfacing. Council members are expected to announce their winning projects in the coming weeks. Elisa Escarce, Columbia Radio News.
The NYPD says its sex crime investigations unit is the best in the country. But survivors of sexual assault and advocates say that while police detectives' communication skills have definitely improved in recent years, they still have a long way to go.
Both sides agree more training is the answer. But as Stevie Hertz found, the question has become how much?
Desdemona Meck is a writer and photographer living in Brooklyn. 8 years ago, she went to a police station in Harlem to report a sexual assault. She remembers her interview with a detective.
She was an older detective and kind of came from the standpoint of telling me that I needed to learn how to protect myself and that I needed to not be in these kinds of situations and to be more careful and more responsible.
And those detectives' words have stuck with her throughout her recovery.
I still have those words that linger in my head saying, you should have done something different.
And it's not just Meck who's had these experiences with the NYPD. Lynn Hecht-Schrafen is an attorney who's trained judges to work with survivors of sexual assault. She says that too often, reporting these crimes to police can itself be a traumatizing experience. So much so that it leads victims to stop cooperating with detectives.
If you've just been through a terrible event and this person continuously treats you as if you are lying and you are the suspect, you're going to walk away.
And victim testimony is often key in sexual assault cases. Without it, a lot of perpetrators can't be prosecuted. But Hecht-Schrafen says many cases don't even get that far. Often victims don't report crimes because they've heard of the police's reputation from other survivors.
In the victim's immediate circle of family and friends, the word goes out, I went to the police, they treated me like garbage, don't do it, okay? And so the broader effect is that you are literally making victims by refusing or failing to treat the first one who comes to your attention with dignity and respect.
Back in 2016, the NYPD introduced a new interviewing training for sex crimes detectives to help solve these kinds of problems. It's called Forensic Experiential Trauma Interview, or FETI. Josie Torrielli is a social worker with the NYC Alliance Against Sexual Assault. She says FETI upends previous assertive interviewing strategies because it lets the victim lead the interview.
So instead of a more traditional method of what happened, what time, what's next, and looking for kind of a sequential narrative, it starts from a place of what can you tell me about your experience or what can you remember?
Torrielli thinks a lot about training. Part of her work includes preparing doctors and nurses to become sexual assault forensic examiners.
You get swabs around your mouth,
A recent Saturday afternoon was the last part of a 3-day course for registered nurses. They'd learnt how to conduct pelvic exams and collect evidence. Now it was the class on communication. 6 nurses in scrubs and white coats sit in a semicircle. In the centre is Verena Salvi, who works with Torielli. She's role-playing as a victim. One by one, the nurses take turns interviewing her, practicing how to find out what happened without making the survivor uncomfortable.
If that's what you believe, that's okay. It's still your choice, but anyhow, we can do it.
It really can be an upending of the way that they're used to practicing. And so it's acquiring a whole different skill set, which sometimes can be a big ask of people.
Emergency professionals are used to finding out what's happened as quickly as possible. And breaking out of the habits of the emergency room or police beat can be difficult for both nurses and detectives. The NYPD's FETI interviewing training lasts 7 days, and changing that culture takes even longer, explains Christopher Bromson, the director of the Crime Victims Treatment Center, an independent advocacy group.
It's important to know that in the past 10 or so years, things have come a very, very long way. And that is not to say that we don't still have a very long way to go.
In March, a report from the New York City Department of Investigations confirmed that there were problems in the Special Victims Division, which investigates sex crimes. The report praised the FETI program, but it also said that overall, detectives were still inadequately trained. And that report got the attention of the city council.
I mean, these are people who've been traumatized like no other. And so far, the NYPD has not prioritized these individuals.
Helen Rosenthal represents the Upper West Side in the New York City Council. She's proposed a bill that would require detectives to have 10 weeks of training before interacting with victims. Now, Special Victims Division, or SVD detectives, get just over 4 weeks of training. For the motorcycle unit, it's 6 to 8.
We need enough detectives and well-trained detectives in order to deal with these very complex and individual cases.
The NYPD did not respond to repeated requests for comment for this story. But it said in a press release online that the Department of Investigation's report is misleading and incomplete. In April, Chief Terrence Monahan appeared before the City Council to say that the NYPD is confident in their detectives.
We know that responding properly to sexual assault requires special skills. Simply put, special victims investigators are the best trained sex crimes investigators in the country.
But Christopher Bromson with the Crimes Victim Treatment Center disagrees.
There's a lot of work left to be done to make SVD something that we would freely suggest to all survivors. I think we have a little bit to go until we get there.
For now, Rosenthal's bill is still going through the City Council, and the NYPD has until the end of May to formally respond to the Department of Investigation's report. Stevie Hertz, Columbia Radio News.
The Met Gala is on Monday, marking the opening of the Costume Institute's spring exhibit. There will be industry-influencing outfits, and at least 2 Kardashians.
The gala is known for breaking boundaries, and this year is no different. The theme revolves around the Catholic Church and how it's influenced fashion. I spoke with Vanessa Friedman, the fashion director at the New York Times. I asked her about what we might find at a Catholic fashion exhibit, and why now?
The exhibition is titled Heavenly Bodies, Fashion and the Catholic Imagination, and it looks exactly at that. It looks at the way Catholicism and Catholic iconography has influenced designers. It's the biggest exhibit the Costume Institute has actually ever put on. It's over 58,000 square feet. It's going to stretch across 3 galleries, and it will include almost 50 pieces that the Vatican has loaned to the museum, including one item that has 18,000 diamonds in it.
Holy moly, that's a lot of diamonds.
It's a lot of diamonds.
The Catholic Church has served as an inspiration for countless designers, especially Dolce & Gabbana.
A lot of Italians, for understandable reasons.
Yeah, so why bring the Catholic Church to the Met right now?
This is actually something Andrew Bolton has been working on. He's the curator of the chief curator of the Costume Institute for the last 2 years, really. He started talking to the Vatican back in 2016, and it took a while to convince them that they should be part of this, although I think there have been some skeptics about the idea.
So you said that there's already been a little bit of pushback to the event. I was wondering what sort of pushback have you seen?
I think it's more that the questions have been raised, internally. And I think, the Vatican, it took a long time to convince the Vatican.
Why do you think it took so long?
Because being part of a fashion exhibit is not, a usual project for the Catholic Church. We all know that fashion is considered, is often dismissed as being superficial, frivolous, expensive, indulgent. But, it's also true that in Catholicism, clothing is used as a way to honor God and the Church. And certainly I think that's how the archbishops and cardinals who ultimately approved this, see this, that this is a way to demonstrate, the beauty of the Church to outsiders.
And what will you be doing Monday night? Are you going to be attending, or are you going to be at home watching?
No, I will be watching glued to my computer, watching the people make their entrances.
And live tweeting.
Exactly.
Vanessa Friedman from the New York Times, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Across the country, Democrats are hoping to flip congressional seats from red to blue. One of the toss-up battlegrounds is New Jersey's 11th district. Democrats there are fired up, but they're up against some tough odds.
Republicans have controlled the 11th for over 20 years. When voters head to the primaries this June, their ballots will include a socially liberal Republican. As reporter Jennifer Siegel found, party lines might not be what decides this race.
Hi, Meredith. My name's Lynn. How are you this evening?
Twice a week, Lynn Poland spends 2 hours calling strangers. And most of the time, she hears this on the other end of the phone.
Hi, we can't get to the phone right now, so...
But for every 50 or so numbers she calls, someone does pick up. And when they do, she's ready to go.
Hi, is this Evan? My name is Lynn. I'm a volunteer with the campaign to elect Mikey Sherrill to the U.S. Congress, and we are calling Democratic voters today.
Poland is sitting at a plastic folding table inside Sherrill's Fairfield campaign office. This afternoon, there are 8 other volunteers here making calls on their cell phones. On the wall behind her, there's a small whiteboard with 35 days until the primary written in red dry erase marker. Poland says doing these phone banking shifts is helping her turn her frustration with national politics into something more productive.
Otherwise, I sit home and, scream at the television. There's nowhere to put that energy, so this is a place to put it and feel like I'm making a difference. I'm doing something.
Poland is one of many Democrats in the district who's become more politically engaged since Trump was elected. And the Democrats in New Jersey's 11th have a lot of momentum right now. They managed to push out Republican Rodney Frelinghuysen, who isn't seeking re-election. The incumbent has lost popularity with constituents who say he's aligning too much with Trump. For Democrats like Poland, flipping this House seat feels tangible.
It's the only way you can put brakes on what's happening with Trump and the Republican majority in Washington.
And these kinds of races are happening all over the country, many of them in Republican strongholds. Democrats have won hard-fought battles in traditionally red districts in Pennsylvania and Alabama and are gearing up for more in Michigan and Virginia. The race in this district is especially tight. One of the candidates Sherrill's up against is Republican Martin Hewitt. He sits in a local cafe in Morristown, sipping Diet Coke as he tells me about his platform.
I've attended every march. I've attended every protest, whether it's the Women's March, whether it's DACA, March for Our Lives. We do need universal health care because it is the most economically efficient. Should we fund Planned Parenthood? I believe in women's rights, period.
DACA? Universal health care? Hewitt's positions are surprising for a candidate running on the Republican ticket. But he says he's also been a registered Democrat and initially entered this race as an independent.
Both Democrats and Republicans suggested that I run to the left of Rodney Frelinghuysen on the Republican ticket.
Hewitt says he saw a need for a middle-of-the-road candidate, someone who would better represent the moderate Republicans in the district who don't agree with Trump's stances on issues like immigration and the environment.
I think that we are certainly at a point where we have Republicans who are more fiscally conservative, such as I am, but they are concerned about the social issues.
Debbie Borey-Holtz agrees. She teaches public policy at Rutgers.
Partisanship isn't going to be the driver. They're only going to go out and vote because of the issues.
And Borey-Holtz says this represents a big shift in how this election will be decided. Another shift, higher voter turnout. But she says the more that Republican candidates lean right to try to appeal to Trump voters, the less likely they are to win their ticket.
So if you have to tack so far to the right to win a primary, your candidacy is doomed in the general this year.
That means candidates like Hewitt might have a better shot than the other Republicans in the race. But ultimately, Borey-Holtz says this race will be decided by the independents and the voters who have been staying at home in previous elections.
Those that haven't voted in the past, they're going to make the difference in 2018. If they don't maintain their momentum and they don't show up, people like the Freelandheisens of the world could save their seats.
But in Pennsylvania's 18th, a traditionally red district, voters did show up. In a March special election for a vacated House seat, Democrat Connor Lamb beat the Republican candidate, but only by 600 votes.
In this district, a lot more of Democrats who would normally have stayed home showed up, or he would not have won.
That's Mikey Reedy. She's a community organizer who helped get Lamb elected. She says that race was won by figuring out what constituents cared about.
We did a listening canvass very early on, and out of that, we found out that most of the people were not worried about, identity politics. They were worried about their pensions, their children's education, their health care.
Not unlike in New Jersey, constituents were more concerned with local issues than party lines. And with a little less than 5 weeks to decide on a candidate, New Jersey voters will have to choose which issues matter most to them. They'll head to the polls for the primary on June 5th. Jennifer Siegel, Columbia Radio News.
Over the past decade, Bushwick has become a center for New York's creatives. Musicians and artists have created a network of informal performance venues known as the DIY scene.
But now, the neighborhood is changing. Rents are rising, and venues are under pressure to close down. Mayor Bill de Blasio created the Office of Nightlife in September last year, but many are asking, is the city doing enough for these cultural spaces? Colin Marston has the story.
Brace yourself. It's a Friday night in Bushwick, and the band Empath is playing. This is the Silent Barn, but it's hardly silent. It's loud, really loud.
Thanks. Happy full moon.
There's a crowd of a few dozen people here at the concert. Lots of black leather and jean jackets. But there's a tinge of sadness, too. Empath is playing one of the last shows at the Silent Barn. Open since 2006, it offers living spaces for artists and a place to make music for bands starting out. For Kathy Ellickson, the lead guitarist of Empath, Silent Barn holds a lot of meaning. This was a place where she learned what the city could offer.
I used to live in Ohio and Columbus. I had really never been to New York before, and I was like, what is this place? I was just kind of like, oh, this is just like this really cool DIY space in New York that I hope I can play someday.
And she did. It was her first gig in New York, and it laid a path of success for the Philly-based band. 3 albums and an interview in The Fader, a popular music magazine. Today, those sorts of stories are becoming rarer.
But then I'm like, I don't know how long this is going to last, and like I don't know where else to go when that eventually gets taken over by like horrible capitalists.
While the horrible capitalists had a part to play, Silent Barn shut its doors at the end of April because organizers ran out of cash. They found it hard to recover from a fire in 2015. They rented out studios and apartments far below market rate, and the cost became too much.
Well, we lasted a good long while.
Nat Rowe was an early member of the Silent Barn Collective.
I reckon we did over 2,000 concerts there. There are many people who got married because they met at Silent Barn. There are so many bands, collaborators, friends, all kinds of relationships that got together, made that connection at Silent Barn because it was a community space.
Rowe lived there for several years. He booked shows, selected artists for residencies, managed the bar.
I was lucky to try on a lot of different hats at Silent Barn and teach myself a lot of skills. It's like a DIY MBA.
Rowe said it was death by 1,000 cuts for Silent Barn. Without nonprofit status, they couldn't get city funding. Going above ground meant months waiting for a liquor license and taking out loans. But he places the blame on larger forces beyond the government.
I don't think that we should have died this young. I think it was a premature death, and so it's really disappointing. But the government is sort of a small player in the city at large. And they're, I think, struggling with something that's much larger than them.
The change? Real estate. As the city came roaring back from the bankruptcy of the 1970s with declining crime and rising rents, Rudy Giuliani's City Hall started cracking down on the DIY venues that had sprung up. From a video on the current mayor's website, Bill de Blasio explains.
In the 1990s, the policy of the city was actually to harass a lot of these venues, and many were forced to close. And a lot of, who we are as a city was undermined. It's pretty shocking. 1 in 5 small venues has been lost in the last couple of decades in this city.
Last September, de Blasio promised a new direction by creating the Office of Nightlife.
And we're not in the gotcha game. We don't want to find problems to create another problem for the owners of these venues. We'd like to just fix the problems as early as possible so everyone can go back to what they do.
They're not resisting. They're not violent.
Wait, somebody said they use pepper spray?
But this raid by another part of the city's bureaucracy suggests otherwise. The art party CD13 was aggressively shut down by March, the multi-agency response to community hotspots. It's a task force of police, fire, and the Department of Buildings. This happened a few years ago, but the raids are still happening.
You feel like, something horrible has happened, like it's a terrorist attack or something.
Olympia Kazi of the New York City Artists Coalition sees the March raids as a criminalization of space for artists.
It's actually all sorts of different departments of the city, but also from the state, that they come together and they basically raid a space. And very often they do that in the middle of the night. They wear uniforms. It's a scary experience.
The program itself was one of the reasons why Councilman Rafael Espinal of Bushwick decided to bring legislation to the city council in 2017, resulting in the Office of Nightlife.
We've seen so many iconic DIY venues close their doors in the past few years. Shea Stadium, 285 Kent, Palisades, Goodbye Blue Monday, and many, many more. These type of spaces continue to be on the brink of extinction, but today, we're one step closer to coming up with a sustainable solution.
One part of that solution is a nightlife mayor and a 12-member advisory board. It's a program that began in Amsterdam in 2014 and expanded to more than 30 cities worldwide. In New York, it's intended to act as a liaison between different nightlife venues and the city's regulatory and policing bureaucracies. One of the most important responsibilities of the nightlife mayor is getting DIY venues up to code, a daunting task.
If you don't know which turns to make and which decisions to make and who to call, it'd be very overwhelming.
John Weingarten, a musician and owner of the venue Sunnyvale in East Williamsburg, explains why it's really difficult for a DIY space to stay atop all the regulations necessary to run a venue in New York City.
There's a certificate of occupancy, there's a public assembly license, but then there's also fire code, and there's also, you have to pay music licensing companies. So many hoops and red tape to jump through that it can be very costly and very difficult.
In the DIY scene of the 1990s and early 2000s, it was cool to be dangerous. Small spaces, no permits, smoking inside. But the scene is changing, says Nat Rowe, a founder of Silent Barn.
The DIY community at this point wants to collaborate with the city, wants to help the establishment be better. And that is such a dramatic change.
Brooklyn girls, we're here to take it back. Brooklyn girls, we're here to take it back.
Here are other members of Silent Barn who lost out when it closed. Jazzo Brooklyn runs Educated Little Monsters, a nonprofit that does art programming at the Silent Barn. She says when the venue closed, musicians weren't the only victims. It was working-class Latino and Black kids growing up in Bushwick.
It'll be the people that are from this community that were able to get access into a space like this and then have to lose it.
We're at a fundraiser that Educated Little Monsters organized to raise $50,000 to secure a new lease to open up the community center again. J.R. Zuckerberg organized it.
We're here right now at Home Baked Zines and Cakes. We've got a bunch of vendors here. We're selling artwork, zines, prints. We got Static Fish, Pratt's Comic Club, and Anthology.
In the meantime, many who love Silent Barn are wondering what comes next. Here's Olympia Katzi.
Whether the community that they create there can survive and thrive, that is up to what the cities do once the people arrive there. And I think New York City is at that crossroad right now, because more and more you hear of people that they just, cannot afford to live here.
I'm too old to start up a new concert space right now.
At 31, Roe, a founder of Silent Barn, says he's tired.
But perhaps some of the younger people and their friends will start a bunch of other spaces and call it something other than Silent Barn. And so we'll just be a footnote. The name Silent Barn will be a footnote in a much larger story about New York City.
Right now, advocates are pushing a number of proposals. Commercial rent stabilization, more funding from the Department of Cultural Affairs, passage of the Small Business Survival Act. The new Office of Nightlife and Nightlife Mayor present an opportunity to stem the flood of displacement. Whether DIY will become merely a footnote to an old New York is up to those who continue to move here, make it, and set up shop. But the lights are close to being shut off. Colin Marston, Columbia Radio News.
If you ask a baseball fan, they'll tell you there are two kinds of New Yorkers, Yankees fans and Mets fans.
And according to a new Quinnipiac poll, Yankees fans are winning the numbers game by a lot. Only 34% of New York City baseball fans root for the Mets, and the team isn't known for winning games either. Reporter Sarah Wyman set out in search of what keeps Mets fans on the hook.
There's more than one way to measure the difference between the Mets and the Yankees. If you're going off of World Series wins, the Yankees come out on top, 27-2. If money is your metric of choice, the Yankees win that one too, with a budget of tens of millions more dollars to buy a star-studded roster. But Mets fans aren't in it for the accolades.
I think the Mets fans somehow like disappointment. It's almost like they expect it.
Marty Appel is a Yankees fan. He's also a baseball historian.
You ask a Mets fan and they say, no, disaster's just around the corner, and it somehow satisfies a need in them to see their hopes dashed.
Appel's Manhattan apartment is home to a collection of baseball memorabilia that would make any Little League player dizzy with glee. 9 baseballs bearing the signatures of Yankees greats in thin black ink are stacked in clear protective cases. A painting of Appel by sports artist Leroy Neiman hangs on the wall. Appel is a fan with a capital F, and he says if winning is something you care about, odds are you're a Yankees fan.
Here, that's a pressure of winning in New York. And I think for a lot of people, rooting for the Yankees is sort of an extension of their own personalities. If the Yankees are winning, somehow, by being a Yankee fan, I'm a better person.
But the Mets, they attract a different crowd.
We lose. We lose a lot. It takes a certain type of person to just accept it.
Sean Steele has been rooting for the Mets since he was a kid. He teaches high school history in Long Island now, and for him, there's something special about being the underdog. He's the kind of fan who roots for the Mets because they lose, not in spite of it.
It's just something, it's grinding out those wins. They never come easy. They're always hard, and they always find a reason to screw up. It's an emotional roller coaster, and I'm okay with that. I think a lot of fans are. It's fun.
Losing is something Mets fans are used to. Their team is rooted in disappointment. It was born from heartbreak when the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants abandoned their fans and moved to the West Coast.
But there is no joy in Gotham. The National League's moved out.
The Mets were a replacement team.
And they were horrible.
Marty Appel again. He says they stayed that way for a long time, but the team attracted new fans anyway, thanks to a Yankee. Casey Stengel became the Mets' first manager in 1962, after 11 years working for the team across town. And he knew, before the fans did, what it meant to be a Met.
He just sort of made everybody fall in love with this inept team because they were trying so hard. That was his take on it. He made that team so lovable that the fans just fell in love with them no matter how many games they lost.
Meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets.
And so began the rise of the Mets. Like a gaudy blue and orange phoenix, the team rose clumsily from the ashes of its forebears. And loving the Mets became bigger than just loving to lose. New fans who fell in love with the Mets when they were winning had become attached by the time the team's luck started to fail.
If you grew up in the 60s and 70s, you know, this was your anthem.
Greg Prince was one of those new fans. He started watching the Mets in 1969, when he was 6 years old and the team was headed for the World Series. He remembers being swept up by the excitement, reading about the Mets' buzz in the newspapers, and sitting on the carpet in front of the living room TV to watch them play, and win.
Mets are the world champions.
But even after the Mets won the World Series, by the time they started losing again, he was still cheering them on, sometimes against his better judgment.
People will tell you they found ways to lose that nobody ever found before.
Prince is the kind of fan who loves his team like he loves his family. You don't choose your family, but you stick with them, no matter what. It doesn't feel like a choice.
Very core of my being, I'm optimistic about them. Like, broadly optimistic and specifically fretful all the time that something's going to go wrong.
But there's another kind of fan. Vincenzo Di Matteis, Michael Loverdi, and Sal Sutera spent 2.5 hours commuting from Staten Island to make it to Citi Field for tonight's Mets game. They're hanging out in the parking lot, decked out in blue and orange Mets gear, clear plastic cups adorned with the Mets logo in hand. Loverdi has a confession to make.
So, did you guys grow up Mets fans?
I started as a Yankee fan.
Oh my God. Whoa!
Until like
we're not
grade.
friends with him anymore.
Until third grade.
Loverdi is a convert, the kind of fan who had a fling with another team before committing to the Mets. He came to his senses during the 2006 season, when the Yankees were in a slump, and for a minute, it looked like the Mets might make it to the World Series.
And they lost to the Cardinals. I asked my mom the next morning. She was like, Mets lost. I started crying. That's how I knew I was a Met fan.
But they all agree the sign of a true Mets fan is whether they stick around.
Because we know the Mets are going to go through some rough times. We know that. We know that's going to happen.
Hot dogs.
Those rough times are waiting just inside the stadium. The Mets are down 3-0 after the first inning. The stands are littered with fans. Fans who don't mind losing, converts like Loverdi, and another kind of Mets fan, the penultimate fan.
Face it.
Michael Cassiano, or King Cougar as he's known around here, sits in section 516, at the top of the stands behind home plate. He isn't wearing the Mets' trademark blue and orange. He doesn't have to. His notebook, in which he scored each of the 8,405 baseball games he's been to, is open on his lap. His cane lies forgotten under his seat.
Hey, struck him out!
Cassiano invented this chant 38 years ago. He's been leading it since, at each of the 727 consecutive games he's attended at Citi Field.
Struck him out!
Cassiano's never been anything but a Mets fan. He and his parents discovered the team in 1962, and Cassiano, a kid at the time, watched enthralled as the Mets lost every one of the first 9 games they played. By game 10, he was hooked.
I used to cry when they lose. I used to carry on in my apartment, and my mother couldn't take it. That's why I started going to games. She couldn't take it.
Tonight, he sticks around through the bottom of the 9th inning. The Mets give him reason to hope. A home run, a grounder to left field, and 2 runners on base. But then, true to form, they lose. And Cassiano, who's seen thousands of games end this way, shrugs his shoulders, picks up his cane, and heads home. He'll be back tomorrow to sit in his spot behind home plate. It won't matter if they win or lose. Sarah Wyman, Columbia Radio News.
And now we close the show with another piece from our commentary series.
Reporter Juan Torres Falcon tells us about starting the second act of his adult life.
I've always been a performer. My mother threw me into theater camp in first grade. She had me in acting lessons, singing, dance, piano, the works. She used to take me to Specs to buy my little Broadway albums. It was my favorite thing to do. And when I was 12, I saw a CD that looked different from all the rest. On the cover was just the silhouette of a woman with her name in big white letters.
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Bernadette Peters!
Bernadette Peters. It was a 2-disc recording of her concert at Carnegie Hall featuring the music of Stephen Sondheim. I begged her to buy it for me, and of course she did. I was just the gayest little thing in the entire state of Florida. The moment I got home, I ran to my mother's bedroom, dropped disc 1 in my boombox, and that's when I heard Bernadette Peters perform Broadway Baby from the musical Follies, disc 1, track 1. The song tells the story of a tired chorus girl dreaming of the day she will finally get to star in a big Broadway show. It was the first time I felt like I got what a Broadway ballad could really do. My mother had a giant walk-in closet, so big you could hang out in it. And it was my stage where I could practice and express myself without judgment. There I stood in my mother's closet wearing her Python 9 West slingback kitten heels, clip-on diamondish stud earrings with a sheet draped asymmetrically over my right shoulder as a gown, cinched at the waist with a Paloma Picasso belt, living my best life belting along to Broadway Baby. That song became my anthem because the thing I wanted more than anything in the world was to be in a big, splashy Broadway show. At 18, I moved to New York and dedicated my life to the theater. And after I graduated from NYU, I started auditioning and went on to perform in A Chorus Line, Rent, West Side Story. It was all out of a dream, but it was real. I'm not a musical theater actor anymore. I remember the day. I was touring with Kinky Boots, and we were playing Kansas City. With an armful of groceries from Trader Joe's, I checked in my hotel room, and I looked around for the fridge, and I realized there wasn't one, so I sat down and wrote my letter of resignation. I needed to be in a place with a fridge. I loved performing, and I was really good at it, but I was tired. Tired of the uncertainty, the powerlessness, tired of directors and casting agents. I was also afraid of aging out. I wanted to leave the party before I was asked to leave by my knees. I left it all behind, and I went back to school to become a journalist. And that dream hasn't been so dreamy. Journalism is not an easy gig. The deadline's the responsibility. I miss acting some days, and I miss saying, "I'll be in my dressing room if you need me." I'm not a Broadway baby anymore. I'm a big old Broadway man, and that 12-year-old's anthem now feels more like an inherited lullaby, familiar and sweet, no longer essential. But whenever I'm down, I play track 1, Broadway Baby, and sing along. It fills my heart with possibility. That's what Bernadette was really singing about. It's about the pursuit of our dreams, the chase. And it took achieving my dream to get that. So I'm just gonna keep on singing my song and chasing the next dream, and the next one after that.
Juan Torres Falcon graduates next week from the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. That's it for our show this Friday, May 4th. I'm Augusta Anthony.
And I'm Mira Gable. A team of very talented producers puts the show together each week. Our editors today were Cassiana McClenahan and Juliet Jibkiro. Eileen Grench, Stevie Hertz, and Amara Omokwe produced the show.
Colin Marston headed up our studio team with Madeline Thompson and Sarah Wyman. Juan Torres Falcon sent this stream live to the web. Executive producer Jennifer Siegel oversaw this broadcast. Radio professionals Deb Amos, Sally Herships, and Ben Shapiro advised our staff.
We hope you have a great weekend, and we also hope to see you here next Friday at 4 p.m. In the meantime, you can always find us on the web at uptownradio.org.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Until next week, may the 4th be with you.